The first night, Maribel slept inside the collapsed Glassworks. Something rolled across the floor after midnight. It wasn't a rat. It wasn't the wind pushing through the broken window frames. It was a blue bottle, moving slowly over the blackened boards, tapping once against her boot, like it had been waiting for her to wake up. By morning, the people of Millbridge were already laughing. They said the girl Amos Bell had thrown out had spent her last $8 on a ruin no sane man would enter. The roof had caved in, the furnace was cracked down the middle, the floor glittered with shards sharp enough to cut through leather. But Mara did not see only wreckage. Her mother had taught her that good glass had a voice. So when she lifted that blue bottle and tapped it with one trembling fingernail, the sound that came back was too deep, too clean, too alive for something everyone called trash. And sealed inside the glass was a folded scrap of paper with a woman's name on it. But what nobody knew was that the name in that bottle was the one her family had spent years trying to bury. Morning came through the broken roof in thin white strips. Mara woke with her cheek against her folded coat and a sting in her right palm. A sliver of clear glass had found her skin while she slept. She pulled it free without making a sound, wrapped the cut in the hem of her sleeve, and checked the inside pocket of her dress before she checked anything else. The blue bottle was still there. So was the little shard her mother had left her. Mara had carried that shard since she was 12, wrapped in a square of faded muslin and hidden at the bottom of a sewing box Amos Bell never bothered to open. Her mother used to take it out on winter evenings when the house grew quiet. She would hold it between two fingers and tap it with her nail, once, gently. "Good glass has a voice," she would say. "Poor glass only answers. Good glass sings back." Mara had not understood then why her mother's eyes changed when the blue shard caught the lamplight. She only remembered the sound, low, clean, almost tender. Now, sitting alone in a ruin the whole town had laughed at, Mara touched that old shard to the bottle from the floor. The colors were not close. They were the same. She wrapped both pieces again when wheels crunched outside. A wagon had stopped beyond the broken loading doors. A narrow man in a brown cap stepped down, carrying a scale hook and a ledger. He looked past Mara, not at the collapsed roof, not at the rusted frames, not at the furnace cracked wide as a dry riverbed. He looked at the floor. "You, the Bell girl?" he asked. Mara stood. "I bought this place. For now." He smiled as if the words were friendly. "Name's Enoch Vale. I deal in salvage. Iron, brass, glass, things a young woman shouldn't have to cut her hands on. I'm not selling. You haven't heard my price." He opened his ledger and tore out a slip. $80 for all blue glass on the property, paid before sundown. Mara kept her bandaged hand behind her back. $80 was 10 times what she had paid. It was food, boots without holes, a room with a real door. It was enough to make most people mistake a trap for mercy. "What about the iron?" she asked. Enoch glanced at the heavy rusted beams as if they bored him. "Worth less than the hauling." "The brass fittings?" "Scrap." "The furnace tools?" "Dead trade." "But the blue glass is worth $80? His smile thinned. "Pretty color sells." Mara looked down at the glittering wreckage near his boots. Most of it was window glass, bottle glass, greenish fragments dulled by ash. But among the ruin, she saw 3 pieces of blue, each with a tiny raised mark along the curve of the base. She had not noticed the marks in the dark. Enoch had. Before she could move, he bent and picked up one of the pieces. His thumb rubbed the raised mark hard enough to scrape dust from it. Mara stepped forward. "Leave it." He paused, still bent, and for the first time his eyes met hers. "Your father said you were stubborn." The words cut deeper than the glass in her palm. "My father sent you. He said you might need sense talked into you." Enoch straightened. "He also said your mother filled your head with foolishness before she died." Blue glass. Old factory stories. Women making more of themselves than they were. Mara felt the shard in her pocket like a live coal. The day before, Amos Bell had stood in their kitchen with a debt paper spread beneath his hand and told her she would marry Mr. Whitcomb by Sunday. Mr. Whitcomb had silver in his beard, tobacco on his breath, and enough money to make Amos call obedience a daughter's duty. When Mara refused, her father did not shout at first. He folded the debt paper. Then he carried her suitcase to the yard and threw it into the mud. "A daughter who will not save her family," he said, "has no family to claim." Mara had picked up her suitcase while neighbors watched through curtains. She had not cried until she reached the courthouse auction, and heard men laugh at her $8 bid. Now, Amos's reach had followed her into the one place he had never spoken of. Enoch held out the slip again. Take the money. Before this building hurts you. Before people start asking why a girl with no home wants a dead Glassworks. Mara looked past him to the old furnace. On the left side of its brick mouth, half hidden under soot, was a narrow side door with a bent latch. It stood slightly open. She had shut it before sleeping. I said I'm not selling. Enoch's face hardened. He dropped the blue fragment. It struck the floor and rang once, faint but clear. You don't know what you're keeping, he said. After he left, Mara waited until the wagon noise faded. Then she crossed the floor and lifted the fragment he had touched. Beneath the dust was a small mark pressed into the glass. 3 joined letters too worn to read. She took out her mother's shard and held it beside the piece. Both carried the same mark. And when she raised the blue bottle toward the morning light, the folded paper inside shifted just enough for her to see the first dark stroke of a name. By noon, Mara had learned that a Glassworks could cut a person even when it stood still. Every broom stroke sent bright splinters sliding under her shoes. Every board complained beneath her weight. Rainwater had gathered in the belly of the roofless room, reflecting the broken rafters like black ribs. She tore strips from an old flour sack and tied them around her palms, then began clearing a path from the loading doors to the small office beside the furnace. If she could make one corner safe, she could survive one more night. That was all she allowed herself to plan. In the office, a rusted stove sat crooked under a pipe that no longer reached the ceiling. Mara packed the gaps with clay from the yard, fed the stove with broken crate wood, and watched smoke crawl sideways before it finally found the pipe. Heat came slowly, thin and dirty, but it came. She found a dented tin cup, 2 bent nails, a coil of wire, and an old packing counter buried under dust. Beneath the counter was a drawer swollen shut. She had to work it loose with the heel of her boot. Inside lay a yellowed receipt. Harlan Glass, Mercantile. Mara had heard the name all her life. The Harlans owned the bank, the freight office, the brick houses on the hill, and half the smiles in town. The receipt was for factory remnants, sold the year after the fire. At the bottom, someone had written in pencil, "Blue stock removed before inventory." Before she could read more, footsteps scraped outside the broken side door. Mara slipped the receipt into her dress. Enoch Vale stood in the doorway, his cap wet with mist. He carried no ledger this time, only a burlap sack. "Forgot some things," he said. "You don't own anything here, not yet." The words were quiet enough to be mistaken for weather. Mara reached for the iron poker by the stove. Enoch noticed and laughed once. "Your father says you're making a spectacle. Sleeping among broken glass, talking to bottles. He's worried folks will think grief turned your mind. My mother has been dead 9 years. Grief waits," Enoch said. "So do courts." That was the first time fear entered her stomach, cold and clean. Not fear of Enoch, fear of papers. Men like Amos did not need to drag a daughter home if they could have a clerk declare she was unfit to own what she had bought. Enoch stepped into the office, looking past her shoulder. His eyes moved over the stove, the counter, the floorboards, then stopped on the pocket where she had hidden the blue bottle beneath her coat. Mara lifted the poker. He smiled again. A girl alone should be careful at night. When he left, one of the blue fragments near the furnace was gone. Mara counted them twice. 3 marked pieces had lain near the brick mouth that morning. Now there were 2. She searched the dust until dusk, crawling under the packing table and along the wall where rain had turned ash to paste. She found mouse bones, bottle caps, a child's marble, and a strip of newspaper from a decade ago. But she did not find the missing glass. At sundown, another visitor came. He was not Enoch. He was taller, better dressed, with polished boots already spoiled by the mud. Thomas Whitcomb stood at the loading doors, holding his hat in both hands, looking ashamed of the building before he looked ashamed of himself. "Mara," he said, "your father sent me." "Of course he did. I didn't come to force anything. You came to look at what $8 buys when a woman refuses you." He lowered his eyes. "I came to tell you not to make Amos your only enemy." The wind moved through the broken windows. Mara did not answer. Thomas stepped carefully over the glass. "My family's debt papers were purchased last month. Yours too. Amos thinks marrying you to me settles matters, but it doesn't. Someone else wants him frightened. Someone with enough money to make him crueler than usual." "The Harlans?" Thomas flinched before he could stop himself. That was answer enough. He looked toward the furnace, then toward the side door. They're asking about this place. Not the land, not the brick. The glass. Blue glass, mostly. Why? I don't know. But my father said the Harlans lost something here years ago, and if it turns up, certain names become expensive. Mara touched the receipt hidden against her ribs. Thomas moved closer, lowering his voice. Sell it if you must. Burn it if you must. But don't sleep here with that bottle in plain sight. Before Mara could ask how he knew about the bottle, he turned and left. That night, she wedged the side door with a crate, tied wire around the latch, and slept sitting up with the poker across her knees. The blue bottle lay wrapped beside her, the folded paper still trapped near the bottom. Near dawn, a soft clicking sound woke her. Not footsteps, not rats. The bottle had warmed near the stove, and the wax sealing the paper inside had loosened. As Mara lifted it to the gray light, the little scroll shifted again. This time, she saw more than the first stroke of a name. She saw the beginning of a letter, and it was written in her mother's hand. Mara did not sleep again after seeing the handwriting. She waited until the stove burned down to a red eye, then carried the blue bottle to the office window, where dawn had begun to gather in the cracked frame. The scroll inside had shifted, but not enough. A loop of ink pressed against the glass. A curve. The start of a capital letter. Her mother's letters had always leaned forward, as if they were trying to leave the page before the sentence was finished. Mara knew that hand. She also knew that if she broke the bottle, she might destroy the only message her mother had managed to leave behind. So she spent the morning trying everything careful. First, she warmed the neck of the bottle near the stove, turning it slowly so the heat would not shock the glass. The wax softened, but the paper stayed lodged near the bottom. Then, she tied a thread to a bent pin and lowered it through the mouth, holding her breath as the metal touched the scroll. It slipped once, caught once, then scraped the inside wall with a sound that made her stop. No, she whispered. Good glass had a voice. It also had limits. By midday, hunger drove her out. She wrapped the bottle in her coat, tucked her mother's shard into her sleeve, and walked to Millbridge Market with her shoulders squared, as if she still belonged to a house with curtains. The market smelled of coal smoke, wet cabbage, and bread cooling on wooden racks. People looked at her hands first. Bandaged palms told stories in a town that preferred not to ask questions. Then she saw the old woman at the far stall. Nora Klein sold seed cakes, brown loaves, and little twists of sugared dough. Her back was bent, but her hands moved with a precision that did not belong only to baking. She turned each loaf a quarter-inch before wrapping it, smoothing the paper with her thumb in a slow circular motion. The same motion a glass polisher used at the wheel. Mara bought one seed cake with her last penny. Nora did not look up. You're Amos Bell's girl. I'm Mara. That is not what I asked. Mara set the wrapped bottle on the stall. Nora's hand froze above the bread. For 1 second, all the noise of the market seemed to fall behind them. Nora looked at the cloth bundle, then at Mara's sleeve, where the blue shard had slipped partly into view. Where did you get that? Nora asked. My mother left me the shard. No. Nora's voice was dry. The bottle. In the Glassworks. Nora glanced across the market. A butcher was watching. So was a clerk from Harlan Mercantile, his pencil still but his eyes moving. Nora pushed a loaf toward Mara. Take your bread and go. I need to open it without breaking it. I don't know anything about bottles. But while she said it, her right thumb slid under the cloth and felt for the base. Not the neck, not the color. The base. Mara saw it. You worked there, she said. Nora pulled her hand back as if burned. Lots of women washed floors in that place. You didn't wash floors. The old woman's face hardened. Girl, there are some doors that stay closed because everyone who opened them paid. Mara leaned closer. Someone came for the blue glass. My father knows about it. The Harlans know about it. And there's paper inside this bottle written in my mother's hand. Nora's eyes changed at the word mother. What was her name? She asked. Mara answered. Evelyn Bell. A tremor passed through Nora's fingers. It was small, but it shook flour from her knuckle onto the stall. Not here, Nora said. She took Mara by the wrist and pulled her behind the market shed, past stacked apple crates and a rain barrel filmed with soot. Only when the market noise was muffled by brick did Nora unwrap the bottle fully. The blue struck the gray daylight and seemed to gather it. Nora covered her mouth. I haven't seen one hole since the fire, she said. You said you didn't know bottles. I said what living taught me to say. She turned it carefully. Her thumb found the raised mark at the base. 3 joined letters worn soft by time. Mara showed her the shard. Nora held the 2 pieces close and shut her eyes. This mark was not for the owners, Nora said. It was for the hands. What hands? Nora did not answer. Instead, she took a hairpin from her bun, bent its tip against the brick wall, and slipped it into the bottle's neck. The motion was so sure Mara forgot to breathe. You never hook the paper, Nora murmured. You turn the glass until the paper comes to the tool. The scroll shifted. Once. Twice. Then a shout came from the market. Nora! The old woman stiffened. The clerk from Harlan Mercantile had stepped out from between the stalls, pretending to study apples while looking straight at them. Nora withdrew the pin before the paper came loose. Hide it, she said. Mara. Hide it now. Mara tucked the bottle under her coat. Nora gripped her wrist hard enough to hurt. Do not take this to your father. Do not let Enoch Vale see the base. And if anyone asks, you broke it. Why? The clerk started toward them. Nora's eyes filled with a fear that looked older than Mara. Because the last woman who kept that color lost more than work. Mara's throat tightened. My mother? Nora looked at the shard again, then whispered a name Mara had never heard spoken in the Bell House. Evain Arlen. The name followed Mara back to the Glassworks. Evain Arlen. Not Evelyn Bell, the quiet wife Amos had kept in a narrow house with curtains always drawn. Not the woman the neighbors remembered only as pale, obedient, and sick toward the end. Arlen, a name with no place in Mara's childhood, except perhaps in the way her mother had gone silent whenever Amos spoke of family. By the time Mara reached the factory yard, rain had stopped. The broken chimney smoked with mist. Behind the building, a tangle of gray-green brush pressed against the rear wall, leaves silvered with water. She had passed it twice without caring. Now she noticed the stalks had been cut near the base in older seasons, not by animals, but by a blade. Someone had harvested weeds from a dead glassworks. That thought stayed with her as she went inside. The main furnace was hopeless. Its brick mouth had split from crown to hearth, and the iron braces had twisted outward from years of heat and neglect. But the smaller furnace near the back wall was different. Mara had seen it before as only another ruin, half buried behind fallen racks and warped molds. Now she cleared the floor around it with careful hands. The little furnace was cracked, but not through. Its door still hung on one hinge. Its ash pit was clogged, but dry. When Mara knelt and touched the lower bricks, she felt no crumble under her fingers. A person with patience, clay, and more courage than sense might make it breathe again. For the first time since Amos threw her suitcase into the mud, Mara allowed herself to plan beyond the next night. She found a stack of old firebrick under a collapsed bench. She sorted the sound ones from the split ones by tapping them with a nail. Dead brick answered flat. Good brick rang dull but firm. Her mother's lesson had not belonged only to glass. Everything made by fire remembered whether it had survived honestly. By afternoon, Mara had patched the worst gaps with clay and ash. She dragged a sheet of tin over the hole in the roof above the small furnace, tied it down with wire, and used broken bottle racks to shield the stove corner from the wind. She was filthy, hungry, and bleeding again from one knuckle, but the back of the glassworks no longer looked entirely dead. Then she opened the ash pit. The ash inside was not black. It was pale gray with a faint blue cast, fine as flour, and strangely clean beneath the top layer of dust. Mara lifted a pinch and rubbed it between her fingers. It smelled of rain, mineral, and something green burned long ago. She looked toward the rear wall, toward the brush outside. A knock sounded at the loading doors. Not Enoch's scrape, not Thomas's hesitation. This knock was gloved, measured, and certain the door would eventually open. A man in a dark coat stood under the sagging beam, holding a leather case against his chest. His boots avoided every puddle, as if mud had signed a contract not to touch him. Miss Bell, he said, my name is Mr. Albright. I represent Harlan Glass and Mercantile. Mara wiped ash from her fingers onto her skirt. This property was sold by the county. So it appears. It was bought by me. So it also appears. He smiled without warmth and stepped inside before she invited him. His eyes moved across the room, not in disgust like the townspeople, but in calculation. He noted the cleared path, the patched tin, the small furnace. Then his gaze stopped on the ash pit. Mara shifted in front of it. Mr. Albright opened his case. There are old claims attached to this site, industrial remnants, disputed equipment, certain proprietary materials that may not have been included in the county sale. Proprietary materials? Items belonging to the former operating company. The company let the roof fall in. Neglect does not always cancel ownership. Mara folded her arms. What item are you looking for? He looked at her then, sharply enough to show he had not expected the question. I am advising you, he said, to avoid handling anything related to the formula. The word settled between them like a dropped blade. Mara had not said formula. Nora had not said formula. Even the paper in the bottle had not yet given her a full sentence. What formula? She asked. Mr. Albright closed his case. A figure of speech. No, it wasn't. His mouth tightened. Miss Bell, you are young. You are alone. You have purchased a dangerous structure with no understanding of the disputes tied to it. The Harlan family is prepared to offer you a clean way out. How clean? $25 and no further questions. Enoch had offered $80 for blue glass. The Harlans offered less for the whole building. That meant they did not only want her gone, they wanted her gone quickly. Mara stepped aside, just enough for him to see the patched little furnace. Tell the Harlans I'm still deciding what I own. His expression changed then. Not anger, recognition. As if he had heard those words from another woman and disliked remembering it. You should be careful whose phrases you borrow, he said. Before she could answer, he looked toward the back wall, at the place where rain-dark vines covered the brick outside. That growth should be cleared, he added. It damages the foundation. Then he left. Mara waited until his carriage rolled beyond the yard. Only then did she go outside. The gray-green brush behind the wall grew thickest beside the small furnace flue. Its stems were woody near the base, leaves narrow, silver underneath. When Mara broke one twig, the scent rose immediately, rain, mineral, and the same green note she had smelled in the ash pit. Not weeds, fuel, or something used like fuel. At the base of the wall, half hidden under roots, one brick sat crooked. It was not loose from weather. The mortar around it had been cut cleanly, long ago, then smeared over with soot and clay. Mara's heart began to beat harder. She fetched the iron poker, knelt in the mud, and worked the tip along the seam. The brick resisted. She pushed again. Clay cracked. A line opened. From inside the wall came a faint hollow sound. Not the crumble of old brick, not the scratch of mice. A space. Mara pressed her ear to the cold wall, and somewhere behind the little furnace, something shifted softly in the dark. The hollow place behind the little furnace did not open easily. Mara worked the poker along the cut seam until mud soaked through her skirt, and her wrist began to shake. The crooked brick shifted only a finger's width. Then a second line cracked above it, and a breath of cold air slipped out from inside the wall. Protected air. She used both hands. The brick came loose with a soft scrape, dropping wet clay onto her boots. Behind it was a narrow cavity, no wider than a bread box. Black with soot at the edges but dry at the center. Mara reached in and touched paper. For one foolish second, hope rose so fast it hurt. Then the bundle came free in pieces. Most of it was burned along one side, tied with brittle thread that snapped the moment she lifted it. Ash flaked onto her lap. The top sheets had been scorched, until only half sentences remained. Furnace batch, blue run, women on late shift, not to be delivered to Harlan. Under those fragments lay a list of names, torn across the top. Mara carried it inside and spread it on the packing counter beside the blue bottle. The first names were missing. Only surnames remained in places, initials in others, and small marks drawn beside each line. 3 joined letters. A crescent, a tilted cross, a loop like a closed eye. She placed the marked blue fragments beside the paper. The marks matched. They were not decoration. They were not factory numbers. They were signatures left by hands that had not been allowed to sign their names. The thought made the room feel crowded. Women had stood here. Women had lifted hot glass, turned it, polished it, marked it, and then watched someone else write ownership over their work. Near the torn edge, only the bottom half of a name remained. The ink had run, but the final letter leaned forward in a way she knew too well. Her mother's sewing box had held scraps of paper covered in careful notes. Evelyn Bell's hand always leaned forward. So did this. Mara did not know whether she was looking at Evelyn Arlen's name or only wanting to see it. That was when something struck the side door. One hard knock, then silence. Mara blew out the lamp. Another knock came, lower this time, near the latch. The wire she had tied there trembled once. Whoever stood outside did not call her name. They were listening for her breathing. She took the blue bottle, the list, and the burned fragments, and hid them under the loose floorboard behind the packing counter. Then she lifted the iron poker and waited until the footsteps moved away. At dawn, she found fresh mud on the threshold. Boot prints crossed the back room, circled the little furnace, and stopped at the wall she had opened. The loose brick had been pushed back into place. Not by her. Mara followed the prints outside. They led through the gray-green brush to the road, where wagon tracks had cut deep into the wet ground. In one rut lay a torn strip of burlap with blue dust caught in the weave. Enoch Vale. By noon, anger had carried Mara to his salvage yard. Enoch was sorting hinges under a shed roof when she threw the burlap scrap onto his table. "You were in my building last night." He looked at the cloth, then at her. Careful with accusations. Careful with locked doors. His eyes flicked to her bandaged hand. "If I'd gone in, girl, I would have taken what I came for." "And what was that?" He wiped his thumb along the table. Blue dust stained the grain. "Anything true blue," he said, and the words sounded memorized. "Who told you to say that?" For the first time, Enoch looked tired instead of sly. "People like me don't get told why, we get told what to fetch." "The Harlans?" He said nothing. "Amus?" That made him laugh without humor. "Your father doesn't hire men. He gets used by them." Mara stepped closer. Then who went inside? Enoch's gaze shifted toward the street. "If you found a place in that furnace wall, stop opening it alone." "You knew about the wall." "I knew men paid me to ask about blue glass. That's all." The salvage yard gate creaked. A Harlan clerk entered with a parcel under his arm, and Enoch's mask returned at once. "Leave," he said. "Now." Mara did. She returned by the alleys, watching every window. At the Glassworks, the side door stood closed exactly as she had left it. Too exactly. The wire on the latch had been untwisted and twisted back by someone who knew how to hide impatience. Someone had come again while she was gone. The little furnace smelled wrong before she reached it. Wet clay, sudden cold, dying heat. Water had been poured into the ash pit and along the fresh patchwork she had made. The new clay had split. One of the good bricks had cracked straight through. Worse, muddy water had seeped toward the open cavity in the wall, carrying grit into the narrow space where the burned papers had been hidden for years. Mara pulled the loose floorboard open with shaking hands. The bottle was safe. The list was damp at the corners, but readable. The burned fragments had curled, fragile as dead leaves. On the side door, just above the latch, was a smear of pale clay. Not from Enoch's gloves. He wore leather. Mara had seen that clay before, under Amos Bell's nails the morning he threw her suitcase into the yard. He had said he had never entered the Glassworks. But the muddy prints by the back wall told a different story. And when Mara followed them to the little furnace, she saw they ended at the very brick she had opened. Mara did not touch the wall again until Nora came. She spent the morning sitting on an overturned crate with the blue bottle wrapped against her chest, watching the patched clay dry in ugly cracks across the little furnace. The destroyed ash pit smelled of wet minerals and old smoke. Every few minutes, she looked at the side door, expecting Amos to step through it with his clean cuffs and his practiced disappointment. He did not come. That frightened her more. At dusk, Nora arrived through the back brush, not the front road. She wore a dark shawl and carried a carpet bag that looked too heavy for bread. Her face tightened when she saw the soaked ash pit, the muddy prints, and the loose brick Mara had pulled free. "You opened it alone," Nora said. "I didn't know what it was. That was how most women got hurt in this town." Nora set the carpet bag down and took out a small hammer, a flat chisel, waxed cloth, and a pair of thin iron tongs wrapped in linen. Mara stared. "You came prepared." "I came ashamed that I waited this long." Together they worked by lamplight. Nora did not take over. She made Mara hold the chisel. She told her where to place it, how to listen through the handle, how to feel whether a brick wanted to break or move. The first row came out whole. The second row cracked at the edges. Behind the furnace wall, a deeper cavity appeared, wider than the first, lined with firebrick and blackened tin. Something lay inside, wrapped in oilcloth. Mara reached for it. Nora caught her wrist. "No, not with bare hands." The old woman slid the tongs into the dark and drew the bundle forward inch by inch. It came free with a sigh of dust, as if the wall had been holding its breath for 20 years. On the packing counter, Nora unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside was a flat metal box, smoke-stained but unburned, no lock. Only a clasp sealed with old blue wax. The mark pressed into the wax was the same 3 joined letters on the bottle base. Mara felt her knees weaken. Nora whispered, "They told us everything in the formula room burned. Did it?" "No." Nora's eyes stayed on the box. "Only the room they wanted people to look at." Mara broke the wax. The first thing inside was a ledger bound in cracked blue cloth. Not large, not grand. A working book, smudged at the edges, with pages numbered in a woman's neat hand. Batch temperatures, ash ratios, cooling times, names of workers assigned to each run, and beside several entries, the same sentence appeared in the margin. Hold for E.A. Mara touched the initials. Nora took a breath that shook. Evelyn Arlen. "My mother." "Before Bell," Nora said. "Before he made that name smaller." Under the ledger lay folded pay sheets, not printed by the company office but copied by hand. Women's names filled the columns. Nora Klein, Ruth Sable, Imogene Pike, Clara Merrow, Evelyn Arlen. Beside each name was a mark, the same kind Mara had seen on the glass fragments. The marks were not secret decoration. They were proof of work. Mara turned another page and found a share certificate, cut almost in half. The top portion was missing. The bottom remained, enough to show seals, signatures, and the words, "Interest in Blue Furnace Process and Associated Works." Below that, in faded ink, was a signature, Evelyn Arlen. Mara stopped breathing. All her life, Amos had spoken of her mother as if she had been a fragile woman who owned nothing, knew little, and depended on his mercy. Evelyn Bell had been a quiet wife because quiet was all the house allowed her to be. But Evelyn Arlen had signed her name like someone standing upright. Nora turned away, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "You knew," Mara said. "I knew pieces. You let me think she was just sad. I let myself think silence was keeping someone alive." Nora faced her again. "After the fire, the Harlans said the women had mixed batches wrong. They said Evelyn stole notes. They said any woman who repeated otherwise would never work in this valley again. And Amos?" Nora did not answer quickly enough. Mara understood before the words came. Nora opened a smaller fold of paper from the box. "He came after she was ill. After you were still little. He brought a notary. He said your mother wanted peace. He said she had signed away whatever foolish claim tied her to the old works. My mother would not sign that." "No," Nora said. "I don't think she did." Mara took the paper. It was a letter, unfinished, written in the same forward-leaning hand she had seen through the blue bottle. "For my daughter, if they have taken my name from every book, let the glass keep it." The rest blurred. Mara sat down hard on the crate. The room did not spin. It sharpened. Every broken pane, every marked fragment, every warning, every time Amos had called her mother weak, all of it changed shape at once. She had not bought a ruin. She had walked into the place her mother had tried to leave behind for her. Nora opened the ledger again, turning pages with careful fingers. There should be a final page. What page? The one naming who held the process after the last blue run. They searched the box. Ledger. Pay sheets. Cut certificate. Letter. A small envelope of blue ash. A paper pattern for a bottle mold. Nothing else. The last page had been sliced cleanly from the ledger. Not torn by fire. Not lost to age. Taken. Mara looked at the cut threads near the binding. Amos. Or Harlan. Both. For the first time, the fear in her did not tell her to run. It told her where to look next. She gathered the papers and wrapped them again, but not to hide them in the wall. She placed them under the loose floorboard behind the counter, then moved the blue bottle beside the ledger. The paper inside still had not come free. Now she knew why her mother had sealed it in glass, instead of trusting a drawer. Glass could break, but it did not forget. A wheel sounded outside. Then another. Nora stiffened. Mara blew out the lamp, but too late. Lantern light swept across the loading doors, bright and deliberate. Amos Bell stepped into the Glassworks with Mr. Albright at his side. Her father looked first at Mara's face, then at the furnace wall, then at the counter where a line of soot still marked the shape of the box. "My God," Amos said softly, almost kindly. Look what this place has done to you. Mara stood between him and the loose floorboard. Amos opened his hand, as if inviting a frightened child home. I've come to take my daughter back, he said, before she destroys her mother's name. Amos Bell stepped over the broken glass, as if the ruin belonged to him. Mr. Albright followed, holding his leather case against his ribs. Nora stayed near the furnace wall, half in shadow, but Mara could hear the old woman's breathing. Fast, angry, afraid. Amos looked around the Glassworks, with the sorrowful face he wore in church, when someone poor needed to be corrected in public. You have slept here, he said, among glass, among rats, among old ashes. I bought it. You bought danger with money you did not have the judgment to keep. Mara did not move from the loose floorboard. Then why are you here so late? To keep this from becoming a legal matter. Mr. Albright opened his case and removed a folded document. Mr. Bell has reason to believe his daughter is acting under emotional distress. If necessary, a petition can be filed to question her capacity to manage property. Nora made a small sound. Amos lifted one hand without looking at her. I am trying to avoid shame. Whose shame? Mara asked. His eyes sharpened. Yours. Your mother's. Mine if you force me. Mara thought of Evelyn Arlen's letter. If they have taken my name from every book, let the glass keep it. My mother's shame is not in this room, Mara said. For the first time, Amos's mouth twitched. He stepped closer. Come home. Give me the bottle. Let Mr. Albright handle whatever foolish papers you found. I will tell the town grief confused you. I will say you were frightened. I will even speak to Mr. Whitcomb about withdrawing without bitterness. You threw me out, and I am offering mercy. No, Mara said. You're offering a locked door with curtains. Amos's face hardened, then softened again too quickly. You sound like her when she was ill. Nora said. She was not ill when she knew the truth. Amos turned. The years fell from his expression. For one naked second, he looked not like a father, not like a church-going man, but like someone staring at a witness he had hoped was dead. Nora Klein, he said, still selling stale bread and old lies? Nora's hands shook, but she did not lower her eyes. Still remembering what men paid us to forget, Mr. Albright cut in. This is exactly why the property must be secured. These remnants create confusion. Remnants, Mara repeated. Is that what you call women's names? Amos pointed at the furnace wall. You don't know what you are opening. I know you were here before. He smiled thinly. A daughter should be careful accusing her father. You had clay under your nails the morning you threw my suitcase into the mud. His eyes flicked toward the ash pit. Too quick. Mara saw it. So did Nora. Amos recovered. This building is full of clay and blue ash. The words landed. Amos looked at her, then at the brush beyond the rear wall, visible through a break in the brick. That old weed ash poisoned more minds than it colored glass. Mr. Albright went still. Mara felt the room tilt into clarity. Amos had never seen the ledger. He had never been told what Nora and Mara found that night. But he knew about the ash from the brush behind the furnace. You said you had never set foot in this place, Mara whispered. I said many things to keep food on your table. To keep my mother small. His voice dropped. Your mother became small because she did not know when to stop. Nora moved forward, but Mara raised a hand. Not now. Amos saw the gesture and mistook it for weakness. Give me the bottle. No. Then I will have you declared unfit. 3. The word surprised them all, including Mara. But once it was out, she stood taller. Amos stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Albright. We have done what decency required. They left without touching anything. That was how Mara knew they would come back. She and Nora moved the ledger before midnight. Not to the wall. Not beneath the counter. Mara wrapped the papers in oilcloth and hid them inside the rusted stovepipe above the office, where no one looking for a furnace secret would reach first. The blue bottle she kept under her coat. Nora refused to leave until the moon rose. If they come, do not defend the building. Defend the papers. What about you? I have lived afraid long enough to know my way home in the dark. But fear had not finished with the Glassworks. Near dawn, Mara woke to the sound of breaking. Not a bottle rolling. Not wind. Breaking. She ran barefoot into the main room with the iron poker in both hands. The loading doors hung open. Cold air rushed through. Someone had dragged crates across the floor, overturned the packing counter, and smashed every loose blue fragment she had sorted. The marked bases were gone. The clear shards remained. The green glass remained. Only the blue pieces with women's marks had been destroyed or taken. Mara checked the stovepipe. The ledger was still hidden. The bottle was still under her coat, but the cavity in the furnace wall had been searched with a knife. Whoever came had not been looking for money, tools, or even the whole secret. They had been looking for the missing last page. By morning, Thomas Whitcomb stood at the yard gate, pale and hatless. "My father knows I came here," he said. "Then leave before he regrets raising an honest son." "He didn't raise one." Thomas swallowed. "The Harlans bought our debt. They bought your father's too. Amos was promised clear papers if you signed the Glassworks back before the end of the week." Mara tightened her grip on the bottle. Thomas looked toward the broken loading doors. "They don't need the building. They need what your mother left in it." Mara said, "Why tell me now?" "Because last night, I heard my father say they had to find the page before you found a voice." Thomas left a folded note on the gatepost. A date, a name, a meeting at Harlan Mercantile. When Mara turned back, Amos stood at the far edge of the yard. She did not know how long he had been there. His gaze was fixed on the shape beneath her coat. "The blue bottle," he said. Mara pulled it free and held it in both hands. For the first time, her father looked afraid. Then he covered it with anger. "That color," Amos said, "never belonged to your mother." Mara did not answer her father. She held the blue bottle until Amos's anger had nowhere to go but back into his own throat. Then she turned and walked into the Glassworks, leaving him outside among the weeds and mud, like any other man who had come too late to claim what he had thrown away. But courage did not keep a roof over her head. By noon, word had spread that Amos Bell's daughter had accused respectable families of stealing from dead women. By evening, the baker refused her credit. The butcher's wife crossed the street. A boy threw a stone through one of the few unbroken office panes and shouted, "Glass girl's gone cracked." Mara swept the shards without crying. At dusk, Nora came through the backbrush again, but this time she was not alone. Two women followed her, both old enough to remember the factory smoke before it stopped. One was thin and sharp-eyed, named Mrs. Sable. The other, Imogene Pike, walked with a cane and carried a cigar box tied shut with string. "I told them no," Nora said. "Then someone from Harlan told the market master my bread stall was a fire hazard." Mrs. Sable snorted. "Nora has sold from that stall for 17 years. It became dangerous the minute she spoke your mother's name." Mara looked at Nora. "They threatened your living. They threatened what little I have left," Nora said. "There's a difference." Inside the office, Imogene opened the cigar box. It held old pay slips, a ribbon faded nearly white, and 3 pieces of blue glass wrapped in newspaper. "My aunt polished furnace runs," Imogene said. "She kept these because the men said women's marks didn't matter." Mrs. Sable tapped one fragment with her cane. "They mattered when the batch came out right." The marks matched Mara's list. Nora spread the burned papers, and the 3 women bent over them with the focus of people reading graves. They did not give Mara a whole history. They gave her pieces. A crescent mark belonged to Clara Marrow, who could judge cooling time by the color at the bottle lip. A tilted cross belonged to Ruth Sable, who lost 2 fingers and still returned to the wheel. A closed eye belonged to Imogene's aunt, who polished every blue bottle in the last run. And this? Mara pointed to the 3 joined letters. The room went quiet. Nora touched the mark on Mara's bottle. "That was not one woman. That was the furnace group, the ones who held the process together. Evelyn was one of them. She was the one who could hear when a batch was wrong," Mrs. Sable said. Mara felt the words strike deep. All her life, Amos had mocked her mother's little lessons as nervous habits, women's fancies, useless tenderness. But here, in this ruined room, the old women spoke of hearing glass as skill. A knock came at the loading doors. All 4 women froze. The man standing outside was small, neat, and dressed like someone who owned more books than shoes. He raised both hands when Mara lifted the poker. "I am not with Harlan," he said, "though I own several things they wish I did not." His name was Julian Reed, a collector of early American glass. He had heard, he said, that a genuine Millbridge blue might still exist. Mara nearly shut the door in his face. Then he opened his case. Inside lay a blue bottle wrapped in velvet. It was beautiful. The color was close enough to make Mara's breath catch. Julian set it on the counter beside hers. "Harlan calls this the official surviving example," he said. "They have displayed it for years." Nora's mouth tightened. Pretty lie. Mara tapped the Harlan bottle. The note was bright, clean, empty. Then she tapped her own. The sound sank deeper and came back warmer, as if the room itself had answered. Julian Reed closed his eyes. There it is. Mrs. Sable whispered. Saints preserve us. What? Mara asked. Julian opened his eyes. The Harlan piece has the color. Yours has the body. Whoever made theirs knew what to imitate, but not what to put into the batch. The ash, Mara said. And the cooling, Nora added. And the hands. Julian reached into his case again and removed an invoice, brittle but intact. I bought the Harlan piece from an estate. This was folded beneath the lining. It names a blue shipment held from sale after the fire. The clerk wrote that the women's marks were to be ground off before transfer. Mara stared at the words. Not rumor. Not memory. A record. Julian pushed it toward her. I thought Harlan had the true bottle. I was wrong. Why help me? Because collectors hate forgeries, he said. Then softer. And because a thing is not more valuable because a woman's name has been scraped from it. Outside, a bell rang from the town square. Nora flinched. Market closing. You should go, Mara said. No. Nora straightened slowly. I should have gone 20 years ago. Tonight I stay long enough to teach you what your mother knew. They worked until the lamp burned low. Nora showed Mara how to wash ash without killing its strength, how to feel grit between finger and thumb, how to warm cullet so old glass did not shock. Mrs. Sable named marks. Imogene copied them beside surviving names. Julian sketched both bottles and wrote notes comparing tone, weight, and base. No one solved the missing page, but by midnight, Mara no longer had only a bottle and a dead woman's letter. She had witnesses, marks, an invoice, and the first shape of a case. As Nora prepared to leave, she pressed her hand over Mara's. If you try a new batch, they will come harder. They're already coming. No, Nora said. Now they'll come afraid. At the door, Julian Reed paused beside the little furnace and looked back at the bottle catching lamplight. If you can make that blue speak again, he said, they cannot call your mother a liar without asking the whole town not to hear it. Millbridge Hall had been built for speeches that made rich men sound generous. That evening, every lamp was lit. The Harlan family had hung blue ribbons along the windows and placed a velvet-covered table beneath the stage, where 3 glass pieces sat under bell jars like relics in a church. A painted banner read, Harlan Glass Restoration, honoring Millbridge Industry. Not one woman's name was on it. Mara stood outside the side entrance with the blue bottle wrapped in her coat, her mother's shard in a small tin, and the oilcloth packet hidden beneath a flour sack in Julian Reed's sample crate. Her hands shook only when she tried to make them stop. Nora noticed. Let them shake now, she said. Inside, let them see what your hands can do. Julian carried his notes. Mrs. Sable and Imogene carried copied marks. Thomas waited near the alley with the meeting note he had taken from his father's desk. None of them looked powerful. That made Mara trust them more. Inside, Judge Whitcomb opened the gathering by praising the Harlans for preserving the noble craft of Millbridge. Amos stood near the front, dressed in black, his face arranged into grief, before Mara even entered. Mr. Albright sat beside him with a folder thick enough to frighten people who had never read law. Mara waited until Mr. Harlan lifted the false blue bottle. This color, he said, belongs to the Harlan legacy. No, Mara said from the aisle. It belongs to the hands you scraped off the glass. Every head turned, a murmur rose, then broke when Amos stood. My daughter is unwell, he said, voice full of pain polished for public use. Since her mother's passing, she has clung to fantasies. I ask your patience while I take her home. You threw me out, Mara said. A few people shifted. Amos lowered his eyes as if wounded. Because you refused help. Because you ran to a condemned building and began sleeping among ashes. Now you come here with accusations against families who fed this town. Mr. Albright rose. Miss Bell has no complete deed, no complete formula record, and no standing to challenge Harlan property. We have reason to believe she removed industrial remnants from a disputed site. There it was. The first wall. Make her look unstable. The second came a moment later. And if she produces the so-called formula ledger, Albright continued, we will show that its final ownership page is missing. Without it, nothing she says proves legal claim. Amos did not smile, but his fingers relaxed. Mara felt the whole room leaning away from her. She could hear what they saw: a homeless girl, a defiant daughter, a ruin, a bottle, a dead mother who could not defend herself. So Mara did not start with law. She started with sound. She walked to the velvet table and pointed to the Harlan bottle. "May I touch it?" Mr. Harlan laughed. "You may not." Julian Reed stepped forward. "I may. You invited me as a collector, and that is the piece you requested I authenticate." Harlan's face tightened, but too many witnesses were watching. Julian lifted the bell jar. Mara tapped the Harlan bottle once with her fingernail. The note was pretty. Bright. Hollow. Then she unwrapped her bottle. Gasps moved through the hall. It did not shine like the Harlan piece. It held the light deeper, darker, as if blue had weight. Mara tapped it. The sound rolled across the room and came back from the rafters. Even men who wanted not to hear it heard it. Nora closed her eyes. "My mother taught me that good glass has a voice," Mara said. "I thought it was a child's lesson. It was not. It was a trade." Albright recovered first. "Tone is not ownership." "No," Mara said. "But it is proof that Harlan's bottle is not what they claim." Julian placed his invoice on the table. The Harlan example was altered after transfer. This invoice states that women's marks were to be ground off before sale. "Forgery," Harlan snapped. Mrs. Sable struck her cane against the floor. "Then explain my mother's mark." Imogene laid out the copied signs beside blue fragments saved from her cigar box. Nora set down the burned list from the furnace wall. Mara unfolded the pay sheets, the batch ledger, and the cut share certificate. Voices rose. Albright seized on the missing page like a man grabbing rope. A torn certificate, a damaged ledger, old women's memories. "This is not proof. Where is the final page naming ownership?" Mara had no answer. The silence lengthened. Amos stepped into it gently. "Mara, enough. Do not shame your mother further. Evelyn was my wife. She was fragile. She would never have wanted you to turn her illness into spectacle," Nora whispered. "No." But Mara kept her eyes on Amos. "What page are you afraid of?" "The page you claim exists. I never described it." His face stilled. Mara stepped closer. "No one said it named ownership except Mr. Albright. No one said where it was cut. But you knew it mattered before tonight." Amos's jaw tightened. Anyone would assume a missing final page matters. "Then why did Thomas hear Harlan men say they needed to find it before I found a voice?" Thomas came forward, pale but steady, and placed the note on the table. "Meeting at Harlan Mercantile. Amos Bell present. Subject: final blue page." The hall erupted. Albright reached for the note, but Julian took it first. Judge Whitcomb demanded order. Mr. Harlan shouted that a son had stolen private papers. Amos's sorrowful mask cracked into open hatred. "You stupid girl," he said. The words rang clearer than the bottle. Mara felt them hit the room. Not daughter, not child, girl. The same word he used when he had thrown her suitcase into mud. Then he made the mistake fear always makes. He tried to wound quickly. "You think that bottle saves her?" Amos said. "That color never belonged to Evelyn. The page said Arlen only because she would not sign it over cleanly." The hall went quiet. Mara could hear the lamps hiss. Albright shut his eyes. Nora's hand went to her mouth. Mara said softly, "You just told them what was on the missing page." Amos looked around, realizing too late that every face had changed. He reached for decency and found none left within arm's length. Harlan pushed back his chair. "This meeting is over." "No," Nora said. The word was not loud, but it stopped him. She stepped beside Mara. Her old hands trembled, so she placed them flat on the table, one on each side of the true blue bottle. "I polished the last bottle," Nora said. "Not for Harlan, not for Amos Bell. For Evelyn Arlen and the furnace women whose marks they ground away." Amos barked, "Liar." Nora looked at him with 20 years of fear burning down to ash. "I was there the night Evelyn sealed the paper in glass," she said, "and I know where the final page went." Mara turned to her. So did the entire hall. Nora's voice broke, but it did not fall. "I did not hide it to save myself," she said. "I hid it because Evelyn asked me to keep one piece where no bellman and no Harlan clerk would ever think to look." And then Nora reached into the lining of her old market shawl. From the lining of Nora Klein's shawl came a folded square of paper no bigger than a church bulletin. It was not grand enough to change a town. It was yellowed, soft at the creases, and stitched at one corner with blue thread. But when Nora placed it beside the torn ledger, the ragged edge matched the cut in the binding as cleanly as a healed wound reopening. Mr. Albright moved first. That proves nothing. Mara almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because men like him always needed truth to arrive wearing their seal before they would call it dressed. No, she said, alone it doesn't. She laid her mother's shard beside the true bottle. Then the invoice Julian had brought. Then the copied marks from Mrs. Sable and Imogene. Then the burned list from the furnace wall. Finally, she placed the final page where it belonged. The page named the Blue Furnace process as held in trust by Evelyn Arlen and the furnace women until proper transfer could be witnessed. No Harlan signature, no Bell signature. Only women's names, cramped into the space history, had tried to deny them. Judge Whitcomb came down from the stage with his face gone pale. "Mr. Bell," he said, "did you witness any transfer from Evelyn Arlen?" Amos stared at the paper as if hatred alone might burn it. "My wife was not in her right mind." Nora's voice cut through. "She was well enough to hide what you could not steal." Albright tried again. "The document is old, unrecorded, improperly stored. Its custody is questionable." Julian Reed stepped forward. "The ink and paper are consistent with the ledger. The cut edge aligns. The wax mark matches the bottle base. And Mr. Bell has just confirmed knowledge of its contents." The room turned toward Amos. That was the moment Mara understood victory was not a door opening. It was a crowd finally seeing the law. Mr. Harlan rose, red-faced. "This is an embarrassment, not a legal proceeding." "No," Judge Whitcomb said slowly. "But tomorrow there will be one." He ordered the papers held under court seal until the county clerk could reopen the records of the Glassworks sale, the factory fire, and the Harlan claim. Harlan Glass and Mercantile was instructed to withdraw its public claim of exclusive ownership over the Millbridge Blue process until the matter was resolved. It was not a fortune. It was not applause. It was a first official sentence spoken in Mara's favor, and it was enough to make Amos Bell look suddenly old. He reached for her arm as the hall began to empty. "Mara." She stepped back. For 21 years, that single word had been a hook. "Daughter, obey. Come home. Be quiet. Save the family. Carry the shame." Now, it was only her name. "You could still stop this," he said. "No," she answered. "I think I just did." He looked past her to the women gathering the papers. "You will ruin what is left of us." Mara folded her mother's shard into her palm. "You buried what was left of her. I'm only bringing it up where air can reach it." Amos had no fatherly grief left to wear. He turned and walked out beneath the Harlan ribbons without waiting for anyone. Mr. Harlan did not leave. He waited until the judge had gone, until Albright was whispering with clerks, until Nora and the others were wrapping the documents. Then he approached Mara with a smile too smooth for a defeated man. "Miss Bell," he said, "whatever unpleasantness occurred tonight, I am a practical person. So am I. $1,000 for the process. Cash. You keep your mother's name on a commemorative plaque. We avoid years of litigation. You leave Millbridge with security." A week earlier, $8 had bought her a roof with holes in it. 1,000 could buy warmth, food, a room no one could drag her from. A life where she never had to hear glass break in the dark again. Nora watched her but said nothing. That mattered. No one would choose for Mara now. She looked at the true blue bottle on the table. It did not gleam loudly. It simply held the lamplight without surrendering it. "You still think the thing you want is the formula," Mara said. Harlan's smile thinned. "Isn't it?" "No. You want the right to tell the story alone." She wrapped the bottle in her coat. "I'm not selling that." By midnight, Mara walked back to the Glassworks with Nora, Mrs. Sable, Imogene, Julian, and Thomas behind her. No one spoke much. The town had not become kind in a single evening. The roof was still broken. The furnace still needed repair. The office window was still shattered from the boy's stone. But when Mara pushed open the loading doors, the ruin did not feel empty. It felt witnessed. She looked at the cracked little furnace, at the patched tin, at the women standing just inside the threshold. Then she set the blue bottle on the packing counter and said, "We start with the roof." By spring, the Glassworks no longer looked abandoned from the road. It did not look restored, either. Mara would have laughed if anyone had used such a polished word. The roof was patched in sections of tin, slate, and boards donated by people who arrived carrying apologies too awkward to speak. The loading doors still groaned. Rain still found 2 places above the packing counter. The main furnace remained a broken giant at the center of the room, but the little furnace breathed. Every morning, before the market opened, Mara crossed the yard with water in one hand and a bundle of gray-green brush in the other. She cut the stalks carefully now, never stripping the roots bare. Nora had taught her that a thing used by fire had to be allowed to return. Inside, Mrs. Sable kept a table of marks. Imogene copied names into a new ledger with ink dark enough for no one to pretend later that the lines had faded. Julian Reed sent letters to collectors and museums, not offering the formula for sale, but recording what had been found and whose hands had made it. Thomas repaired the office window and never asked Mara to thank him. The court case did not end quickly. Men with good coats argued over custody, transfer, and proprietary interest. Harlan's lawyers tried to make the women's marks look sentimental, then accidental, then irrelevant. Amos came twice and sat at the back without speaking. The second time, he looked older than the dust on his boots. Mara did not look at him long. She had learned that not every broken thing asked to be repaired by the person it had cut. In June, the county clerk entered Evelyn Arlen's name into the record beside the blue furnace process. The names of Nora Klein, Ruth Sable, Imogene Pike's aunt, Clara Marrow, and the other furnace women were attached as documented workers and originators of the marked runs. It was not perfect justice. Some wages would never be paid. Some graves had no stones. Some families learned the truth too late to hear an apology. But the names were written. That mattered. On the morning the new sign arrived, Mara stood outside the Glassworks and did not touch it at first. The painter had followed her instructions exactly. No gold trim, no grand claim, just black letters on a blue board. Arlen Furnace Works. Blue glass made by remembered hands. Under that, in smaller letters, were the women's names. Nora stood beside her, pretending the cold made her eyes water. Too plain? Mara asked. Plain things last, Nora said. They hung it over the loading doors with Thomas holding the ladder and Mrs. Sable criticizing every nail. When it was done, people gathered in the road. Not a crowd like the hall. Smaller, quieter. The butcher's wife left a basket of eggs on the step. The boy who had broken the office pane brought 2 panes of salvaged glass and stared at his shoes until Mara told him where to set them. No one was forgiven because they brought useful things. But useful things were allowed through the door. That afternoon, Mara opened the back room to 4 girls from the poor end of Millbridge. They came with patched sleeves, nervous faces, and hands that already knew work. Nora showed them how to turn a cooled bottle without scratching it. Mrs. Sable made them repeat the old marks before they touched a tool. Mara did not start with the furnace. She started with listening. She set 3 pieces of glass on the table. 1 poor. 1 pretty. 1 true. Tap them, she said. The first girl laughed when the bad piece answered flat. The second frowned at the pretty one, hearing brightness without depth. The third touched the true piece and looked up slowly when the sound came back warm from the room. Mara smiled. Good, she said. Never let anyone tell you skill is just feeling because it came through your hands. Weeks later, the first new bottle came from the little furnace. It was not perfect. One shoulder leaned slightly. A small bubble rested near the base like a caught breath. The color, though, was right, not loud, not decorative, deep, storm blue, alive where the light entered and darker where it held itself back. Mara turned it in her hands and saw the mark pressed into the base. 3 joined letters. Beside them, she had added 1 more small sign, a forward-leaning stroke, shaped like the first letter she had seen through the old bottle. F for Evan. The bottle could have sold that day. Julian said so gently. There were collectors who would pay enough to repair the rest of the roof, buy better tools, maybe even put proper glass in every window before winter. Mara listened. Then she carried the bottle to the office. Her mother's blue shard no longer lived in her pocket. It rested in a small glass case on the wall, beside the final page Nora had saved and a copy of the letter sealed long ago in the last bottle. Mara had opened that paper under Nora's hands and with more patience than fear. The message was short. If my daughter finds this, tell her I was not silent because I had nothing to say. I was saving one true thing for her. Mara placed the new bottle on the windowsill beneath it. Outside, Late sun crossed the yard and entered through the repaired pane. Light passed through the bottle and spread blue across the packing counter, across the ledger, across Mara's hands. For the first time, the color did not feel like a wound she had carried from childhood. It felt like a door. Behind her, one of the girls tapped a cooled piece of glass and waited for the answer. The sound rose softly through the room. Mara did not turn around at once. She closed her eyes and listened as the Glassworks, the place everyone had called worthless, sang back with a name that could no longer be buried.